Section number 6 of Myths of Babylonia and Assyria. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Myths of Babylonia and Assyria by Donald Alexander Mackenzie. Chapter 5. Myths of Tammuz and Ishtar. Among the gods of Babylonia, none achieved wider and more enduring fame than Tammuz, who was loved by Ishtar, the amorous queen of heaven, the beautiful youth who died and was mourned for and came to life again. He does not figure by his popular name in any of the city pantheons, but from the earliest times of which we have knowledge until the passing of Babylonian civilization, he played a prominent part in the religious life of the people. Tammuz, like Osiris of Egypt, was an agricultural deity, and as the Babylonian harvest was the gift of the rivers, it is probable that one of his several forms was Damu-zi-abzu, Tammuz of the abyss. He was also the child, the heroic lord, the sentinel, the healer, and the patriarch who reigned over the early Babylonians for a considerable period. Tammuz of the abyss was one of the members of the family of Ea, god of the deep, whose other sons, in addition to Merodach, were Nira, an obscure deity, Kigula, world-destroyer, Baruntasa, broad-ear, and Bara and Barogula, probably revealers or oracles. In addition, there was a daughter, Ki-dime-azaga, child of the renowned spirit. She may have been identical with Belit-sheri, who is referred to in the Sumerian hymns as the sister of Tammuz. This family group was probably formed by symbolizing the attributes of Ea and his spouse Damkina. Tammuz, in his character as a patriarch, may have been regarded as a hostage from the gods, the human form of Ea, who instructed mankind, like King Osiris, how to grow corn and cultivate fruit trees. As the youth who perished annually, he was the corn spirit. He is referred to in the Bible by his Babylonian name. When Ezekiel detailed the various idolatrous practices of the Israelites, which included the worship of the sun and, quote, every form of creeping thing and abominable beasts, close quote, a suggestion of the composite monsters of Babylonia, he was brought, quote, to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was towards the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Close quote. The weeping ceremony was connected with agricultural rites. Corn deities were weeping deities. They shed fertilizing tears, and the sowers simulated the sorrow of divine mourners when they cast seed in the soil to die, so that it might spring up as corn. The ancient custom, like many others, contributed to the poetic imagery of the Bible. They that sow in tears, David sang, shall reap in joy. He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. In Egypt, the priestesses who acted the parts of Isis and Nephthys mourned for the slain corn god Osiris. Gods and men before the face of the gods are weeping for thee at the same time when they behold me. All my sister goddesses are at thy side and behind thy couch, calling upon thee with weeping, yet thou art prostrate upon thy bed. Live before us, desiring to behold thee. It was believed to be essential that human beings should share the universal sorrow caused by the death of a god. If they remained unsympathetic, the deities would punish them as enemies. Worshippers of nature gods, therefore, based their ceremonial practices on natural phenomena. Writes Professor Robertson Smith, quote, the dread of the worshippers that the neglect of the usual ritual would be followed by disaster is particularly intelligible if they regarded the necessary operations of agriculture as involving the violent extinction of a particle of divine life. Close quote. By observing their ritual, the worshippers won the sympathy and cooperation of deities, or exercised a magical control over them. The Babylonian myth of Tammuz, the dying god, bears a close resemblance to the Greek myth of Adonis. It also links with the myth of Osiris. According to Professor Saisei, Tammuz is identical with Daonos or Daos, the shepherd of Pantibibla, referred to by Berossos as the ruler of one of the mythical ages of Babylonia. We have therefore to deal with Tammuz in his twofold character, as a patriarch and a god of fertility. The Adonis version of the myth may be summarized briefly. Ere the god was born, his mother, who was pursued by her angry sire, as the river goddesses of the folk tales are pursued by the well demons, transformed her into a tree. Adonis sprang from the trunk of this tree, and Aphrodite, having placed the child in a chest, committed him to the care of Persephone, queen of Hades, who resembles the Babylonian Ereshkigal. Persephone desired to retain the young god, and Aphrodite, or Ishtar, appealed to Zeus, or Anu, who decreed that Adonis should spend part of the year with one goddess and part of the year with the other. It is suggested that the myth of Adonis was derived in post-Homeric times by the Greeks indirectly from Babylonia through the Western Semites, the Semitic title Adon, meaning Lord, having been mistaken for a proper name. This theory, however, cannot be accepted without qualifications. It does not explain the existence of either the Phrygian myth of Attis, who was developed differently from the Tammuz myth, or the Celtic story of Diarmid and the boar, which belongs to the archaeological hunting period. There are traces in Greek mythology of pre-Hellenic myths about dying harvest deities, like Hyakinthos and Heregone, for instance, who appear to have been mourned for. There is every possibility, therefore, that the Tammuz ritual may have been attached to a harvest god of the pre-Hellenic Greeks, who received at the same time the new name of Adonis. Osiris of Egypt resembles Tammuz, but his Mesopotamian origin has not been proved. It would appear probable that Tammuz, Attis, Osiris, and the deities represented by Adonis and Diarmid were all developed from an archaic god of fertility and vegetation, the central god of a myth which was not only as ancient as the knowledge and practice of agriculture, but had existence even in the hunting period. Traces of the Tammuz-Osiris story in various forms are found all over the area occupied by the Mediterranean or brown race from Sumeria to the British Isles. Apparently, the original myth was connected with tree and water worship and the worship of animals. Adonis sprang from a tree. The body of Osiris was concealed in a tree which grew round the sea-drifted chest in which he was concealed. Diarmid concealed himself in a tree when pursued by Finn. The blood of Tammuz, Osiris, and Adonis reddened the swollen rivers which fertilized the soil. Various animals were associated with the harvest god, who appears to have been manifested from time to time in different forms, for his spirit pervaded all nature. In Egypt, the soul of Osiris entered the Apis bull, or the ram of Mendes. Tammuz in the hymns is called a preeminent steer of heaven, and a popular sacrifice was a white kid of the god Tammuz, which, however, might be substituted by a sucking pig. Osiris also had associations with swine, and the Egyptians, according to Herodotus, sacrificed a pig to him annually. When Set, at full moon, hunted the boar in the delta marshes, he probably hunted the boar form of Osiris, whose human body had been recovered from the sacred tree by Isis. As the soul of Bata, the hero of the Egyptian folk tale, migrated from the blossom to the bull, and the bull to the tree, So apparently did the soul of Osiris pass from incarnation to incarnation. Set, the demon slayer and the harvest god, also had a boar form. He was the black pig who devoured the waning moon and blinded the eye of Ra. In his character as a long-lived patriarch, Tammuz, the king Daunus or Daus of Berosus, reigned in Babylonia for 36,000 years. When he died, he departed to Hades, or the abyss. Osiris, after reigning over the Egyptians, became judge of the dead. Tammuz of the Sumerian hymns, however, is the Adonis-like god who lived on earth for a part of the year as the shepherd and agriculturalist so dearly beloved by the goddess Ishtar. Then he died so that he might depart to the realm of Ereshkigal, or Persephone, queen of Hades. According to one account, his death was caused by the fickle Ishtar. When that goddess wooed Gilgamesh, the Babylonian Hercules, he upbraided her, saying, "On Tammuz, the spouse of thy youth, thou didst lay affliction every year." King's Translation. References in the Sumerian hymns suggest that there also existed a form of the legend which gave an account of the slaying of the young god by someone else than Ishtar. The slayer may have been a Set-like demon, perhaps Nin-Shach, who appears to have symbolized the destroying influence of the sun. He was a war deity, and his name, Professor Pinches says, quote, is conjectured to mean Lord of the Wild Boar. Close quote. There is no direct evidence, however, to connect Tammuz's slayer with the boar which killed Adonis. Ishtar's innocence is emphasized by the fact that she mourned for her youthful lover, crying, "My hero, my lord, ah me, I will say, food I eat not, water I drink not, because of the exalted one of the netherworld, him of the radiant face, yea, radiant, one of the exalted one of the netherworld, him of the dove-like voice, yea, dove-like." The Phrygian Attis met his death, according to one legend, by self-mutilation under a sacred tree. Another account sets forth, however, that he was slain by a boar. The Greek Adonis was similarly killed by a boar. This animal was a form of Ares, or Mars, god of war and tempest, who also loved Aphrodite, or Ishtar. The Celtic Diarmid, in his character as a love-god with lunar attributes, was slain by the green boar, which appears to have been one of the animals of a ferocious hag, an earth and air mother with various names. In one of the many Fingalian stories, the animal is, quote, "that venomous boar, and he so fierce, that grey eyebrows had with her herd of swine." Close quote. Diarmid had eloped with the wife of Finmakul, or Fingal, who, like Ares, plotted to bring about his rival's death, and accordingly set the young hero to hunt the boar. As a thunder god, Finn carried a hammer with which he smote his shield. The blows were heard in Lochlann, Scandinavia. Diarmid, like Tammuz, the god of the tender voice and shining eyes, had much beauty. When he expired, Finn cried, "No maiden will rise her eye, since the mould has gone over thy visage fair. Blue without rashness in thine eye, passion and beauty behind thy curls. Oh, yesternight it was green, the hillock. Red it is today with Diarmid's blood." Tammuz died with the dying vegetation, and Diarmid expired when the hills apparently were assuming their purple tints. The month of Tammuz wailings was from 20th June till 20th July, when the heat and dryness brought forth the demons of pestilence. The mourners chanted, he has gone to the bosom of the earth, and the dead are numerous in the land. Men are filled with sorrow, they stagger by day in gloom. In the month of thy year which brings not peace hast thou gone? Thou hast gone on a journey, and makes an end of thy people. The following extract contains a reference to the slaying of the god. The Holy One of Ishtar, in the middle of the year the fields languish. The shepherd, the wise one, the man of sorrows, why have they slain? In his temple, in his inhabited domain, the child, Lord of knowledge, abides no more. In the meadows, verily, verily, the soul of life perishes. There is wailing for Tammuz, quote, at the sacred cedar, where the mother bore thee, close quote, a reference which connects the god, like Attis and Osiris, with tree worship. The wailing is for the herbs. The first lament is, they are not produced. The wailing is for the grain, ears are not produced. The wailing is for the habitations, for the flocks which bring forth no more. The wailing is for the perishing wedded ones, for the perishing children, the dark-headed people create no more. The wailing is also for the shrunken river, the parched meadows, the fish pools, the canebrakes, the forests, the plains, the gardens, and the palace, which all suffer because the god of fertility has departed. The mourner cries, how long shall the springing of verdure be restrained? How long shall the putting forth of leaves be held back? Whither went Tammuz? His destination has already been referred to as the bosom of the earth, and in the Assyrian version of the Descent of Ishtar, he dwells in the house of darkness among the dead, quote, where dust is their nourishment, and their food is mud, and the light is never seen, close quote, the gloomy Babylonian Hades. In one of the Sumerian hymns, however, it is stated that Tammuz, quote, upon the flood was cast out, close quote. The reference may be to the submarine house of Ea, or the blessed island to which the Babylonian Noah was carried. In this Hades bloomed the nether garden of Adonis. The following extract refers to the garden of Damu, or Tammuz. Damu, his youth therein slumbers. Among the garden flowers he slumbers. Among the garden flowers he is cast away. Among the tamarisks he slumbers. With woe he causes us to be satiated. Although Tammuz of the hymns was slain, he returned again from Hades. Apparently he came back as a child. He is wailed for as child Lord Gishzida, as well as my hero Damu. In his lunar character, the Egyptian Osiris appeared each month as the child surpassingly beautiful. The Osiris bull was also a child of the moon. Says Plutarch, quote, it was begotten by a ray of generative light falling from the moon. Close quote. When the bull of Attis was sacrificed, his worshippers were drenched with its blood, and were afterwards ceremoniously fed with milk, as they were supposed to have renewed their youth and become children. The ancient Greek god Eros, or Cupid, was represented as a wanton boy or handsome youth. Another god of fertility, the Irish Angus, who resembles Eros, is called the ever-young. He slumbers like Tammuz and awakes in the spring. Apparently, it was believed that the child god Tammuz returned from the earlier Sumerian paradise of the deep, and grew into full manhood in a comparatively brief period, like Vyasa and other supermen of Indian mythology. A couplet from a Tammuz hymn says tersely, in his infancy, in the sunken boat he lay. In his manhood, in the submerged grain he lay. The boat may be the chest in which Adonis was concealed by Aphrodite when she confided him to the care of Persephone, queen of Hades, who desired to retain the young god, but was compelled by Zeus to send him back to the goddess of love and vegetation. The fact that Ishtar descended to Hades in quest of Tammuz may perhaps explain the symbolic references in hymns to mother goddesses being in sunken boats also, when their powers were in abeyance, as were those of the god for part of each year. It is possible, too, that the boat had a lunar and a solar significance. Khonsu, the Egyptian moon god, for instance, was associated with the spring sun, being a deity of fertility and therefore a corn spirit. He was a form of Osiris, the patriarch, who sojourned on earth to teach mankind how to grow corn and cultivate fruit trees. In the Egyptian legend, Osiris received the corn seeds from Isis, which suggests that among great mother god worshipping peoples, it was believed that agricultural civilization had a female origin. The same myths may have been attached to corn gods and corn goddesses, associated with water, sun, moon, and stars. That there existed in Babylonia at an extremely remote period an agricultural myth regarding a patriarch of divine origin who was rescued from a boat in his childhood is suggested by the legend which was attached to the memory of the usurper king Sargon of Akkad. It runs as follows. I am Sargon, the mighty king of Akkad. My mother was a Vestal priestess, my father an alien, whose brother inhabited the mountain. When my mother had conceived me, she bare me in a hidden place. She laid me in a vessel of rushes, stopped the door thereof with pitch, and cast me adrift on the river. The river floated me to Aki, the water-drawer, who, in drawing water, drew me forth. Aki, the water-drawer, educated me as his son, and made me his gardener. As a gardener, I was beloved by the goddess Ishtar. It is unlikely that this story was invented by Sargon. Like the many variants of it found in other countries, it was probably founded on a form of the Tammuz Adonis myth. Indeed, a new myth would not have suited Sargon's purpose so well as the adaptation of an old one, which was more likely to make popular appeal when connected with his name. The references to the goddess Ishtar and Sargon's early life as a gardener suggest that the king desired to be remembered as an agricultural patriarch, if not of divine, at any rate of semi-divine origin. What appears to be an early form of the widespread Tammuz myth is the Teutonic legend regarding the mysterious child who came over the sea to inaugurate a new era of civilization and instruct the people how to grow corn and become great warriors. The northern peoples, as archaeological evidence suggests, derived their knowledge of agriculture, and therefore their agricultural myths, from the Neolithic representatives of the Mediterranean race with whom they came into contact. There can be no doubt that the Teutonic legend refers to the introduction of agriculture. The child is called Skef, or Skiof, which signifies sheaf, or Shuld, the son of Skiof. Shuld is the patriarch of the Scyldings, the Danes, a people of mixed origin. In the Anglo-Saxon Beowulf poem, the reference is to Scyld, but Aedolvir, William of Malmesbury, and others adhered to Skiof as the name of the patriarch of the Western Saxons. The legend runs that one day a boat was seen approaching the shore. It was not propelled by oars or sail. In it lay a child fast asleep, his head pillowed upon a sheaf of grain. He was surrounded by armor, treasure, and various implements, including the fire-borer. The child was reared by the people who found him, and he became a great instructor and warrior, and ruled over the tribe as king. In Beowulf, Scyld is the father of the elder Beowulf, whose grandson Hrothgar built the famous hall. The poem opens with a reference to the patriarch shield of the sheaf. When he died, his body, according to the request he made, was laid in a ship which was set adrift. Quote, "Upon his breast lay many treasures, which were to travel with him into the power of the flood. Certainly they, the mourners, furnished him with no less of gifts, the tribal treasures, than those had done who in his early days started him over the sea alone, child as he was. Moreover, they set besides a gold-embroidered standard high above his head, and let the flood bear him, gave him to the sea. Their soul was sad, their spirit sorrowful. Who received that load, men, chiefs of council, heroes under heaven, cannot for certain tell." Close quote. Skeof, or shield, is identical with Yngve, the patriarch of the Ynglings, with Frey, the harvest and boar god, son of Njord, the sea god, and with Hermod, referred to as follows in the Eddic Lay of Hyndla. Quote, "To some grants he wealth, to his children war fame, word skill to many, and wisdom to men, fair winds to seafarers, songcraft to skalds, and might of manhood to many a warrior." Close quote. Tammuz is similarly the heroic lord of the land, the wise one, the lord of knowledge, and the sovereign, lord of invocation. Heimdall, watchman of the Teutonic gods, also dwelt for a time among men as Rig, and had human offspring, his son Thrall being the ancestor of the Thralls, his son Kurl of Kurls, and Jarl of noblemen. Tammuz, like Heimdall, is also a guardian. He watches the flocks and herds, whom he apparently guards against the Galu demons, as Heimdall guards the world and the heavens against attacks by giants and monsters. The flocks of Tammuz, Professor Pinches suggests, quote, "recall the flocks of the Greek sun god Helios. These were the clouds illuminated by the sun, which were likened to sheep. Indeed, one of the early Sumerian expressions for fleece was sheep of the sky. The name of Tammuz in Sumerian is Dumuzi, or in its rare fullest form, Dumuzida, meaning true or faithful son. There is probably some legend attached to this which is at present unknown." Close quote. So the Sumerian hymn chanters lamented, quote, "Like an herdsman, the sentinel place of sheep and cattle, he, Tammuz, has forsaken. From his home, from his inhabited domain, the sun, he of wisdom, preeminent steer of heaven, the hero unto the nether herding place has taken his way." Close quote. Agni, the Aryo-Indian god, who, as the sky sentinel, has points of resemblance to Heimdall, also links with Tammuz, especially in his Mitra character. Agni has been established among the tribes of men, the son of the waters, Mitra acting in the right way. Rigveda, Book 3, Hymn 5. Agni, who has been looked and longed for in heaven, who has been looked for on earth, he who has been looked for has entered all herbs. Rigveda, Book 1, Hymn 98. Tammuz, like the Egyptian lunar and solar god Khonsu, is the healer, and Agni drives away all disease. Tammuz is the god of sonorous voice. Agni roars like a bull, and Heimdall blows a horn when the giants and demons threaten to attack the citadel of the gods. As the spring sun god, Tammuz is a youthful warrior, says Jastrow, triumphing over the storms of winter. The storms, of course, were symbolized as demons. Tammuz, the heroic lord, was therefore a demon slayer, like Heimdall and Agni, Each of these gods appear to have been developed in isolation from an archaic spring god of fertility and corn whose attributes were symbolized. In Teutonic mythology, for instance, Heimdall was the warrior form of the patriarch Skef, while Frey was the deified agriculturalist who came over the deep as a child. In Saxo's mythological history of Denmark, Frey, as Frode, is taken prisoner by a storm giant, Beli, the Howler, and is loved by his hag sister in the Teutonic Hades, as Tammuz is loved by Eresh-ki-gal, spouse of the storm god Nergal, in the Babylonian Hades. Frode returns to earth, like Tammuz, in due season. It is evident that there were various versions of the Tammuz myth in ancient Babylonia. In one, the goddess Ishtar visited Hades to search for the lover of her youth. A part of this form of the legend survives in the famous Assyrian hymn known as The Descent of Ishtar. It was first translated by the late Mr. George Smith of the British Museum. A box containing inscribed tablets had been sent from Assyria to London, and Mr. Smith, with characteristic patience and skill, arranged and deciphered them, giving to the world a fragment of ancient literature infused with much sublimity and imaginative power. Ishtar is depicted descending to dismal Hades, where the souls of the dead exist in bird forms. Quote, I spread like a bird my hands. I descend to the house of darkness, the dwelling of the god Irkala, to the house out of which there is no exit, to the road from which there is no return, to the house from whose entrance the light is taken, the place where dust is their nourishment and their food mud. Its chiefs also are like birds covered with feathers. Their light is never seen, in darkness they dwell. Over the door and bolts is scattered dust. Close quote. When the goddess reaches the gate of Hades, she cries to the porter, quote, Keeper of the waters, open thy gate that I may enter. If thou openest not the gate that I may enter, I will strike the door, the bolts I will shatter. I will strike the threshold, and will pass through the doors. I will raise up the dead to devour the living. Above the living the dead shall exceed in numbers. Close quote. The porter answers that he must first consult the queen of Hades, here called Allatu, to whom he accordingly announces the arrival of the queen of heaven. Allatu's heart is filled with anger, and makes reference to those whom Ishtar caused to perish. Quote, Let me weep over the strong who have left their wives. Let me weep over the handmaidens who have lost the embraces of their husbands. Over the only son let me mourn, who ere his days are come is taken away. Then she issues abruptly the stern decree, Go, keeper, open the gate to her. Bewitch her according to the ancient rules. That is, deal with her as you deal with others who come here. As Ishtar enters through the various gates, she is stripped of her ornaments and clothing. At the first gate her crown was taken off, at the second her earrings, at the third her necklace of precious stones, at the fourth the ornaments of her breast, at the fifth her gemmed waist-girdle, at the sixth the bracelets of her hands and feet, and at the seventh the covering robe of her body. Ishtar asks at each gate why she is thus dealt with, and the porter answers, Such is the command of Allatu. After descending for a prolonged period, the queen of heaven at length stands naked before the queen of Hades. Ishtar is proud and arrogant, and Allatu, desiring to punish her rival whom she cannot humble, commands the plague demon Namtar to strike her with disease in all parts of her body. The effect of Ishtar's fate was disastrous upon earth, growth and fertility came to an end. Meanwhile, Pop-Sukal, messenger of the gods, hastened to Shamash, the sun deity, to relate what had occurred. The sun god immediately consulted his lunar father, Sin, and Ea, god of the deep. Ea then created a man-lion named Nadushu-Namir to rescue Ishtar, giving him power to pass through the 7 gates of Hades. When this being delivered his message, quote, "Alatu struck her breast, she bit her thumb. She turned again, a request she asked not." Close quote. In her anger she cursed the rescuer of the Queen of Heaven. Quote, "May I imprison thee in the great prison. May the garbage of the foundations of the city be thy food. May the drains of the city be thy drink. May the darkness of the dungeon be thy dwelling. May the stake be thy seat. May hunger and thirst strike thy offspring." Close quote. She was compelled, however, to obey the high gods, and addressed Namtar, saying, "Unto Ishtar give the waters of life, and bring her before me." Thereafter the Queen of Heaven was conducted through the various gates, and at each she received her robe and the ornaments which were taken from her on entering. Namtar says, "Since thou hast not paid a ransom for thy deliverance to her, Alatu, so to her again turn back for Tammuz, the husband of thy youth. The glistening waters of life pour over him. In splendid clothing dress him, with a ring of crystal adorn him." Ishtar mourns for the wound of Tammuz, smiting her breast, and she did not ask for the precious eye stones, her amulets, which were apparently to ransom Tammuz. The poem concludes with Ishtar's wail. "O my only brother Tammuz, thou dost not lament for me. In the day that Tammuz adorned me with a ring of crystal, with a bracelet of emeralds, together with himself he adorned me. With himself he adorned me. May men mourners and women mourners on a bier place him, and assemble the wake." A Sumerian hymn to Tammuz throws light on this narrative. It sets forth that Ishtar descended to Hades to entreat him to be glad and to resume care of his flocks. But Tammuz refused, or was unable to return. His spouse unto her abode he sent back. She then instituted the wailing ceremony. The amorous Queen of Heaven sits as one in darkness. Mr. Langdon also translates a hymn, Tammuz 3, which appears to contain the narrative on which the Assyrian version was founded. The goddess who descends to Hades, however, is not Ishtar, but the sister Belit Sheri. She is accompanied by various demons, the Galu demon, the Slayer, etc., and holds a conversation with Tammuz which, however, is unintelligible and badly broken. Apparently, however, he promises to return to earth. Quote, "I will go up, as for me I will depart with thee. I will return, unto my mother let us go back." Close quote. Probably 2 goddesses originally lamented for Tammuz, as the Egyptian sisters Isis and Nephthys lamented for Osiris, their brother. Ishtar is referred to as "my mother." Isis figures alternately in the Egyptian chants as mother, wife, sister, and daughter of Osiris. She cries, "Come thou to thy wife in peace, her heart fluttereth for thy love. I am thy wife, made as thou art, the elder sister, soul of her brother. Come thou to us as a babe. Lo, thou art as the bull of the 2 goddesses. Come thou, child growing in peace, our Lord. Lo, the bull, begotten of the 2 cows Isis and Nephthys. Come thou to the 2 widowed goddesses. O child, Lord, first maker of the body, Father Osiris. As Ishtar and Belit-sheri weep for Tammuz, so do Isis and Nephthys weep for Osiris. Quote, calling upon thee with weeping, yet thou art prostrate upon thy bed. Gods and men are weeping for thee at the same time when they behold me, Isis. Lo, I invoke thee with wailing that reacheth high as heaven. Close quote. Isis is also identified with Hathor, or Ishtar, the cow. Quote, the cow weepeth for thee with her voice. Close quote. There is another phrase, however, to the character of the mother goddess which explains the references to the desertion and slaying of Tammuz by Ishtar. Says Jastrow, quote, she is the goddess of the human instinct, or passion which accompanies human love. Gilgamesh reproaches her with abandoning the objects of her passion after a brief period of union. Close quote. At Ishtar's temple, quote, public maidens accepted temporary partners, assigned to them by Ishtar. Close quote. The worship of all mother goddesses in ancient times was accompanied by revolting unmoral rites, which are referred to in condemnatory terms in various passages in the Old Testament, especially in connection with the worship of Ashtaroth, who was identical with Ishtar and the Egyptian Hathor. Ishtar, in the process of time, overshadowed all the other female deities of Babylonia, as did Isis in Egypt. Her name, indeed, which is Semitic, became in the plural Ishtarate, a designation for goddesses in general. But although she was referred to as the daughter of the sky Anu, or the daughter of the moon Sin or Nanar, she still retained traces of her ancient character. Originally, she was a great mother goddess who was worshipped by those who believed that life and the universe had a female origin in contrast to those who believed in the theory of male origin. Ishtar is identical with Nina, the fish goddess, a creature who gave her name to the Sumerian city of Nina and the Assyrian city of Nineveh. Other forms of the creatrix included Mama or Mami or Ama, mother, Aruru, Bau, Gula, and Zerpanitu. These were all preservers and healers. At the same time, they were destroyers, like Nin-sun and the queen of Hades, Ereshkigal, or Alatu. They were accompanied by shadowy male forms ere they became wives of strongly individualized gods, or by child gods, their sons, who might be regarded as brothers or husbands to their mothers, to use the paradoxical Egyptian term. Similarly, great father deities had vaguely defined wives. The Semitic Baal, the Lord, was accompanied by a female reflection of himself, Beltu, the lady. Shamash, the sun god, had for a wife the shadowy Aa. As has been shown, Ishtar is referred to in a Tammuz hymn as the mother of the child god of fertility. In an Egyptian hymn, the sky goddess Nut, the mother of Osiris, is stated to have built up life from her own body. Shri, or Lakshmi, the Indian goddess, who became the wife of Vishnu, as the mother goddess Saraswati, a tribal deity, became the wife of Brahma, was, according to a Purana commentator, quote, the mother of the world, eternal and undecaying. Close quote. The gods, on the other hand, might die annually. The goddesses alone were immortal. Indra was supposed to perish of old age, but his wife Indrana remained ever young. There were 14 Indras in every day of Brahma, a reference, apparently, to the ancient conception of Indra among the great mother-worshipping sections of the Aryo-Indians. In the Mahabharata, the god Shiva, as Mahadeva, commands Indra on one of the peaks of Himavat, where they met, to lift up a stone and join the Indras who had been before him. Quote, "And Indra, on removing that stone, beheld a cave on the breast of that king of mountains, in which were 4 others resembling himself." Close quote. Indra exclaimed in his grief, "Shall I be even like these?" These 5 Indras, like the 7 sleepers, awaited the time when they would be called forth. They were ultimately reborn as the 5 Pandava warriors. The ferocious, black-faced Scottish mother-goddess Cailleach Bure, who appears to be identical with Mala Leith, grey eyebrows of Fingalian story, and the English Black Annis, figures in Irish song and legend as the Old Woman of Bear. This old woman, Cailleach, had, says Professor Kuno Meyer, quote, 7 periods of youth, one after another, so that every man who had lived with her came to die of old age, and her grandsons and great-grandsons were tribes and races. Close quote. When old age at length came upon her, she sang her swan song, from which the following lines are extracted. Ebb tide to me as of the sea. Old age causes me reproach. It is riches, yea love, it is not men. In the time when we lived, it was men we loved. Our arms, when they are seen, are bony and thin. Once they would fondle, they would be round glorious kings. I must take my garment even in the sun. The time is at hand that shall renew me. Freya, the Germanic mother-goddess, whose car was drawn by cats, had similarly many lovers. In the Icelandic poem Lokazena, Loki taunts her, saying, "Silence, Freyja! Full well I know thee, and faultless art thou not found. Of the gods and elves who here are gathered, each one hast thou made thy mate." Idun, the keeper of the apples of immortal youth, which prevent the gods growing old, is similarly addressed. "Silence, Idun, I swear, of all women, thou the most wanton art. Who couldst fling those fair-washed arms of thine about thy brother's slayer? Frigg, wife of Odin, is satirized as well. Silence, Frigg, earth's spouse for a husband, and hast ever yearned after men. The goddesses of classical mythology had similar reputations. Aphrodite, Venus, had many divine and mortal lovers. She links closely with Astarte and Ashtaroth, Ishtar, and reference has already been made to her relations with Adonis, Tammuz. These love deities were all as cruel as they were wayward. When Ishtar wooed the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh, he spurned her advances, as has been indicated, saying, "On Tammuz, the spouse of thy youth, thou didst lay affliction every year. Thou didst love the brilliant Alalu bird, but thou didst smite him and break his wing. He stands in the woods and cries, 'Oh, my wing!'" He likewise charged her with deceiving the lion and the horse, making reference to obscure myths. Thou didst also love a shepherd of the flock, who continually poured out for thee the libation, and daily slaughtered kids for thee. But thou didst smite him, and didst change him into a leopard, so that his own sheep-boy hunted him, and his own hounds tore him to pieces. These goddesses were ever prone to afflict human beings who might offend them, or of whom they wearied. Demeter, Ceres, changed Asclepius into an owl, and Stellio into a lizard. Rhea, Ops, resembled the towered Cybele, mother of 100 gods, the wanton who loved Attis, Adonis. Artemis, Diana, slew her lover Orion, changed Actaeon into a stag, which was torn to pieces by his own dogs, and caused numerous deaths by sending a boar to ravage the fields of Oeneus, king of Calydon. Human sacrifices were frequently offered to the bloodthirsty mothers. The most famous victim of Artemis was the daughter of Agamemnon, quote, "divinely tall and most divinely fair." Close quote. Agamemnon had slain a sacred stag, and the goddess punished him by sending a calm when the war fleet was about to sail for Troy, with the result that his daughter had to be sacrificed. Artemis thus sold breezes like the northern wind-hags and witches. It used to be customary to account for the similarities manifested by the various mother goddesses by assuming that there was constant cultural contact between separate nationalities, and, as a result, a not inconsiderable amount of religious borrowing. Greece was supposed to have received its great goddesses from the Western Semites, who had come under the spell of Babylonian religion. Archaeological evidence, however, tends to disprove this theory. Writes Dr. Farnell, quote, "The most recent researches into Mesopotamian history establish with certainty the conclusion that there was no direct political contact possible between the powers in the valley of the Euphrates and the western shores of the Aegean in the 2nd millennium BC. In fact, between the nascent Hellas and the great world of Mesopotamia, there were powerful and possibly independent strata of cultures interposing." Close quote. The real connection appears to be a racial one. Among the Mediterranean Neolithic tribes of Sumeria, Arabia, and Europe, the goddess cult appears to have been influential. Mother worship was the predominant characteristic of their religious systems, so that the Greek goddesses were probably of pre-Hellenic origin, the Celtic of Iberian, the Egyptian of Proto-Egyptian, and the Babylonian of Sumerian. The northern hillmen, on the other hand, who may be identified with the Aryans of the philologists, were father worshippers. The Vedic Aryo-Indians worshipped father gods, as did also the Germanic peoples and certain tribes in the Hittite Confederacy. Earth spirits were males, like the Teutonic elves, the Aryo-Indian Rebus, and the Burkans, masters of the present-day Buryats, a Mongolian people. When the father-worshipping peoples invaded the dominions of the mother-worshipping peoples, they introduced their strongly individualized gods, but they did not displace the mother goddesses. The Aryan Hellenists, says Dr. Farnell, quote, "were able to plant their Zeus and Poseidon on the high hill of Athens, but not to overthrow the supremacy of Athena in the central shrine in the aboriginal soul of the Athenian people." Close quote. As in Egypt, the beliefs of the father worshippers, represented by the self-created Ptah, were fused with the beliefs of the mother worshippers, who adored Isis, Mut, Net, and others. In Babylonia, this process of racial and religious fusion was well advanced before the dawn of history. Ea, who had already assumed manifold forms, may have originally been the son or child lover of Damkina, Lady of the Deep, as was Tammuz of Ishtar. As a fish, Ea was the offspring of the Mother River. The mother worshippers recognized male as well as female deities, but regarded the great goddess as the first cause. Although the primeval spirits were grouped in 4 pairs in Egypt, and apparently in Babylonia also, the female in the first pair was more strongly individualized than the male. The Egyptian Nu is vaguer than his consort Nut, and the Babylonian Apsu than his consort Tiamat. Indeed, in the narrative of the creation tablets of Babylon, which will receive full treatment in a later chapter, Tiamat, the Great Mother, is the controlling spirit. She is more powerful and ferocious than Apsu, and lives longer. After Apsu's death, she elevates one of her brood, named Kingu, to be her consort, a fact which suggests that in the Ishtar Tammuz myth survives the influence of an exceedingly ancient mode of thought. Like Tiamat, Ishtar is also a great battle heroine, and in this capacity she was addressed as, quote, "the lady of majestic rank exalted over all gods." Close quote. This was no idle flattery on the part of worshippers, but a memory of her ancient supremacy. Reference has been made to the introduction of Tammuz worship into Jerusalem. Ishtar, as Queen of Heaven, was also adored by the backsliding Israelites as a deity of battle and harvest. When Jeremiah censured the people for burning incense and serving gods whom they knew not, he said, "Neither they, yea, nor your fathers." They made answer, "Since we left off to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings for her, we have wanted all things, and have been consumed by the sword and the famine." The women took a leading part in these practices, but refused to accept all the blame, saying, "When we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven, and poured out drink offerings unto her, did we make our cakes, and pour out drink offerings unto her without our men?" That the husbands, and the children even, assisted at the ceremony, is made evident in another reference to goddess worship. "The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead the dough, to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven." Jastrow suggests that the women of Israel wept for Tammuz, offered cakes to the mother goddess, etc., because, quote, "in all religious bodies, women represent the conservative element. Among them, religious customs continue in practice after they have been abandoned by men." Close quote. The evidence of Jeremiah, however, shows that the men certainly cooperated in the archaic ceremonials. In lighting the fires with the vital spark, they apparently acted in imitation of the god of fertility. The women, on the other hand, represented the reproductive harvest goddess in providing the food supply. In recognition of her gift, they rewarded the goddess by offering her the cakes prepared from the newly ground wheat and barley, the first fruits of the harvest. As the corn god came as a child, the children began the ceremony by gathering the wood for the sacred fire. When the women mourned for Tammuz, they did so evidently because the death of the god was lamented by the goddess Ishtar. It would appear, therefore, that the suggestion regarding the conservative element should really apply to the immemorial practices of folk religion. These differed from the refined ceremonies of the official cult in Babylonia, where there were suitable temples and organized bands of priests and priestesses. But the official cult received no recognition in Palestine. The cakes intended for a goddess were not offered up in the temple of Abraham's God, but in the streets of Jerusalem and those of other cities. The obvious deduction seems to be that, in ancient times, women everywhere played a prominent part in the ceremonial folk worship of the Great Mother Goddess, while the men took the lesser part of the god whom she had brought into being and afterwards received as husband of his mother. This may account for the high social status of women among goddess worshippers, like the representatives of the Mediterranean race, whose early religion was not confined to temples, but closely associated with the acts of everyday life. End of chapter 5.